Alright, so what we have here is the stock front. Alright, as you can see when I turn the wheel, it's making a pretty gnarly noise in there. And there's a, I believe what we call an axial movement to it that shouldn't be present even with the suspension unloaded. And you can also see that the wheel doesn't turn very freely by itself. There seems to be a lot of drag on it that I think is coming from the wheel bearings. So let's get it apart, get in there and check out what's going on. What we have is I was driving home last night from a family member's house for Christmas and started to pick up in here a bit of a racket in the front end. And then so I went to Advance today to buy some stuff to clean and repack the wheel bearings. And just as my suspicions, once we've gotten the wheel off, you can see there's a outer round. It's locking up. It's binding as we try to turn the hub. So that's definitely an issue with the bearings. Possibly a lot more severe than I thought it would be. We'll just have to see. Once we get in there, looks like somebody has already been into it. Looks like it's been kind of gnarled up around the edge here and kind of beat on the end. That's unfortunate. And that worries me a bit. But we can't do anything about that right now. We'll just have to see what we got once we get in there. Now, instead of pulling the caliper by itself, instead of pulling the entire assembly, which I've had to do on some vehicles, all we're going to do today is just pull the caliper, since the mount doesn't come across and interfere with removing the rotor itself. So I'll get the caliper off and then I'll show you how we did it when we get back. I don't know if you can hear that. That is bad news, guys. Right there's the caliper. The caliper on these cars are extremely easy to take off and extremely affordable to have to replace if you have to. These with a $5 core at Advance run about $21. And again, they're held on just by two locking plates. One on the top. Right here you can see right here. You can see one hole for the locking plate. And then on the bottom here, the other. So, again, we got to stay on task though. That noise is what's so concerning. Alright, so we'll get it apart. Basically, to remove this entire rotor assembly, you remove the castellated retainer that goes over the spindle nut. Now, the spindle nut is torqued normally to a specification. Now on this older car, and the fact that I'm going to try to reuse the bearings, I'm not going to be torquing it. I'm going to try to do it by hand. But as you can see, someone else apparently did about the same, because I can just remove it with my fingers. Normally to seat the bearings, you wouldn't run one on finger tight. That's ridiculous. To hold the bearings in their races without any play or movement. But also as the bearings wear into the races, you'll pick up play. Though on a well done job, I wouldn't even expect after several years that it would be that easy. That's not what I normally see. And then try to hold this as we remove the outside bearing and take a look at it. some good. Let's sit up there, see if we can get. It's wore to pieces. Alright, you can see here one of the rollers for the bearing. That's just one of the many damaged ones. So obviously that bearing is going to have to be replaced. So no question that the bearing is bad, but many times, most often, when a bearing goes bad, you end up having a bad race as well. And sure enough, if you look down in there, and you can very clearly see that the race is ruined. Two very obvious gouges out of the race. Now you'll see that I've replaced the spindle nut on the spindle. There's an easy way to remove the rear oil seal without damaging it off of the rotor by placing the nut on the spindle, if you're careful, and then inserting it. Once you have the rotor just kind of hanging there, you can feel that the nut is on the inside area of the rotor, pressed up against the wall of the rotor, and then you take both hands and pull forward very far. It'll remove the rear bearing and seal most of the time without any damage. Let's give it a shot. I'm not sure if you got the shot, but that's the result. A very quick movement, removes everything and leaves it intact and serviceable again. If I were to use it, if I were to choose to use it, that would be a very quick and easy way of doing it. If you do replace the bearing, replace the race as well. Don't mate a new bearing to an old race, because this race has relieved over the years and a new bearing will not, and it will increase wear, and in a few months you'll be back in here doing the same thing again, doubling your cost and your time and your parts for nothing. So here you can see we started driving the race out. It's almost flush with the exterior of the rotor. It seems to be coming out pretty easy, and I'm going to try to set up a way of showing you, filming the last few hits. And what I want to do is I want to flip the rotor over and nest it right here in the wheel, and just fall into the cup here. And it'll be held nice and sturdy in spot. And I won't be able to see it, but right down there, that shiny edge right there is what we're going to be driving against. Alright, you'll see, try to watch where I put the punch. You'll see this edge right here that I'm driving against. We just set the punch against it, and then strike it with a hammer, and then and here you can see the race has been driven out, and the inside is still in good condition. Fortunately, the race never spun in the hub, which would have made it necessary to replace everything. It looks like I'm going to get by without having to do that this time. So as we clean this up, we can start to see that this race is in fine condition, and the back bearings seem to be in really good condition. The rotors in good condition. Overall, this is an acceptable rotor, and the race drove out nice and clean. So I am just going to buy the outside racing bearing and reinstall those, and then grease everything up, pack it really well, and put it back together. Using a toothbrush, dip down a little bit of gas You can see that the gas turns pretty gnarly pretty quick. I've just gone through and cleaned the interior of the hub all the way around, and then used an old rag to kind of remove any excess dirt that was knocked loose from an unseen region in there. We're going to take just the old brake parts cleaner and one final shot to clean out anything that might have been stuck. So again, you can see how nicely this one cleaned up. It's absolutely perfect. It's already mated to the old bearing, so we got no issues there, and we should be able to get the old car on the road pretty soon. Alright, next to come, reinstallation. We've cleaned the spindle, checked the bearing area on the front and rear of the spindle to make sure that they're not guffed up or messed up in any way, and you can see that it's pretty clean. Thankfully, bearings are wear items. This is the oil seal. They're only about $3. We should never reuse those if you don't have to, but I do have to since no one carries it and I need this back together today. It'll take me a couple days to get this in. So earlier in the video I showed you how to remove this without damaging it, and after it's been cleaned up and sprayed down, we'll take a little bit of wheel bearing grease and condition these rubber parts again so they don't become brittle. So we have that. We have the inner wheel bearing that's in fine shape, cleaned several times. You can see it spins freely. There's no more dirt that comes out after we begin to rinse it with parts cleaner. It started to run clear. No more dirt or grease or anything's coming out there. We have the cap that we've cleaned the inside, all the dirt and the gunk out of. We have the retaining washer. We have the spindle nut. You can see that it has a chamfered base on it. That part of the face will press up against the washer. You can see where it has created a shiny area. So this nut should only go on one way, and I have run it up and down the spindle to clear up any burrs. And then we have the castellated cap that goes on there, and then our cleaned up and kind of halfway straightened up cotter pin that will lock everything together. Okay, after a few minutes of sanding, you can see we've started to pick up some light hash marks. This obviously isn't as good as machine sanding, and it's certainly not like turning a few thousandths off and then using an abrasive wheel to break the pattern. But what you want to do is just break up that slick mirror finish that was on there, especially if you're installing new brakes. You would ideally want to turn this a few thousandths, even if it's not out around. You just kind of want a hash pattern across there, a hash mark, so the brakes can cut their own seat so they won't squeal. Just give you an idea, that's what we've started to see in the front, and the back that hasn't been used, you can still see has that really almost mirror-like effect. And no hash marks. So the brakes will just kind of glide and chatter across this if I were to leave it that way. Now they may still just glide and chatter here because these are really superficial, but it's what I can do today, and I've got the time, and it might be better than nothing. This is the race we're going to be driving in. This is the bearing that's going to be taking place of it, of the damaged one. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this race right there. And it's going to have to seat against this lip. And you can see after this one has been driven down a bit, this will kind of seat in behind it, and it won't be quite as squirrely. So we should be able to get more even strikes on it and drive it more evenly down into its seat. You should start to hear when it seats, the tone of the strikes will change. You'll hear it more throughout the entire rotor. Yeah. You hear it. You hear the way the strikes are more solid. We know now that that race has seated. We're at the point now that we need to start repacking these bearings. This is by far the most important part. You really have to pack these bearings with multi-purpose grease. You have to get underneath and inside of them, really pack them well. If you don't, you're going to be doing this again in about a week. Don't be shy, and you'll see when you start to get enough, you'll see it back up through the channels in the back. Grease is cheap, so use a lot of it. So once you see it really packed in well, then you flip it and start packing the other thread. Now we're to the point that we have reinstalled the rear bearing, we've packed it well, we've greased it well, reinstalled the rear oil seal, the bearing seal. I think I've got it down about far enough. It's a little hard to tell. So we're going to take and just tap to make sure that is seated well. Looks about right, and it seems to have stopped recessing. What we don't want to do is deform that inner lip any more than it already was. We have our front bearing greased well, packed in a plastic bag. We have our front race put in. You can see there. We will grease the spindle and add some more grease on the inside, lightly grease the race, and then install our front bearing and our retaining hardware, and we're done. We're ready to go back together. Try to stay off of the face of the rotor as much as possible and clean up as much as possible when you're done. Alright. We take our new bearing and install it into the new race. You see this bearing is well greased and packed solid, so it should be good to go. With that, immediately you can see a difference. Seat everything with our retaining washer. And then we're going to run out again. Remember, there's a chamfer here that we want to place against that retaining washer. Like I said earlier, normally there's a torque specification that this should be torqued down to. And with a new bearing, I guess I should be doing that. But a few things are going to stop me. First off, I don't have a wrench large enough. And secondly, I didn't look up what the torque spec was. So we're just going to eyeball it. That's about right. So you can see that. We'll mark this and try to watch how many times that comes around. You see it's about one turn. So that's about right. And then we put our castellated nut on in a position that it clears. There are multiple areas here, multiple points that you can always, if it doesn't line up correctly there, you can just shift it down one, and that will create the tension you need to keep everything nice and snug. Obviously you see a huge difference than what it was earlier today. It's well seated, it's well tightened. And now we're going to just bend over our cotter pin to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. And we are done.